Shalom, shalom, and boker tov to everyone in English. This is in English, and you're probably Moshe speaking English. Hey, that's great. Well, welcome you this morning. I started thinking about the English that I have somewhat abandoned as we were studying prior to the Kuzari. We wanted to resume where we left off on the Kuzari, especially understand that the Kuzari was a king which basically of Khazar, which brought in a lot of the whole entire kingdom, which was converted to Judaism as a result of the work, according to many, of the Chacham, Rabbi Halevi, who is the main rabbi who basically reached out to the king of Khazar, and actually was the principal person about the conversion of the king, and as a result, all of the citizenry under the king of Khazar. Now, it's interesting that he asked a very fascinating question, in which brings the Chacham, Rabbi Levi, into a situation of being humiliated. Because obviously he says, well, we talked about the great sacrifices of the temple. You have no temple, so what's happening here? The Christians believe that the souls gathered there in the sense to heaven. Muslims believe that this is the place where the prophets ascended to heaven, and is the site of the day of judgment, destination of pilgrimage of all the religions, and place where to direct their prayers. And it seems to me, says the Kuzari, that you bowing and kneeling in the direction of the land is only for the sake of appearance. It's just to show appearance that you are homaging the place, like one who flatters another person or praises. And let me say this, that many people imitate the Jews in a lot of their ways, and it's the greatest form of flattery. The greatest form of flattery is imitation. So when people imitate the Jews, they dress like the Jews, they want to act and talk like the Jews. Don't take it as an offense. Take it really as what it is. It's a form of flattery that they want to be. They want to be like the Jews, but even though they're not Jews. So don't get offended when you see groups like the Messianics and other Christian groups wanting to behave and act like a Jew. They're all getting in preparation to become Jews. That's the way I look at it, and I've seen a transition taking place where a lot of Christians, they either embrace the Noahidism, eventually leave Noahidism, embrace Judaism, or they leave Christianity and they embrace Messianic Christianity, and they begin learning, wanting to know more about the Jew named Jesus, and begin to embrace the concept of Judaism, and then eventually abandon that, and they embrace traditional Orthodox Judaism. So it's in a form of a phase, as it were, as a transition, as a journey in life, in their life. As they learn more, they become more aware of exactly where they come from and where they're going. And the direction is obviously one. It is to become a Jew. Interesting, the ways of Israel, our emblem, if you've seen it, it's different roads, different inroads, but it's all focused on not the Israeli star so much as the heart of where the Israeli star is supposed to be, which is Torah. Without Torah, there will be no Jewish people. Without Torah, there will be no Israel. And we need to understand that, because people put aside that we can be a Jew without Torah. No, that's not possible, because within 2 to 3 generations, there would be no Jews without Torah. And that we've seen it with the issue of assimilation. We see it today, that as people depart from Torah, leave Judaism, eventually their life become absent of Torah value. And as a result, they become, in future generations, they become so assimilated that they're no longer considered Jews. And they become lost, disconnected from the Jewish people. That is the worst form of karet that we know today. Now let's take a look here, because the Kuzari says, look, I see you're bowing all of this, and still there for the foremost desire that there was to dwell in it, not to leave it even during the times of the famine, except as directed by God, that they even asked that their mortal bodies be brought to it. Think about it. There's such importance of the Holy Land, of the temple, that even the Kuzari understood the sanctity that the Jewish people had over the temple in the land of Israel. Now the Chacham responds to the Kuzari, the king. Says, "You have humiliated me greatly, O king. The truth is that this sin of not ascending to the land is that which precludes the completion of the divine promise concerning the divine presence in the second Beit HaMikdash, as were promised. Sing and rejoice, O daughter of Zion, for I am coming and shall dwell among you, spoke the Lord." Zechariah chapter 2, verse 14. This is because the divine flow was already prepared to descend upon it, just as it descended upon the nation's inception. Had everybody then been ready and willing to return to the land, actually, however, only part of the nations returned to the land, whereas the majority, including the leading leaders, remained in Babylon. They chose to remain in exile and to serve the kings of the nation so as not to leave their homes and their affairs. Interesting enough, those of you who know a little bit about the history of the first century, even this person in which the Messianics talk about so greatly about the Jesus, that he's the Messiah, he's a Christ. And I spoke to a group of pastors the other day regarding a passage in their Christian Bible in Matthew that clearly Jesus was a failure. He failed at being able to bring back the lost house of Israel. And he said that in an interesting passage in chapter 11 of Matthew, in which I talked about, because I wanted to bring it to the point that Jesus could have been, he should have been, he would have been, but he failed in the task as the Messiah. So when you Christians say Jesus is the Christ, which literally means the Messiah, you are stating in other words that he in fact is king. He was never coronated as king. He was never anointed to be king. He was even rejected by those who had the power in the power seat of the religious society in the temple as to assume the position to restore the Davidic dynasty. By the way, he wasn't the only one rejected. We learned even by our own sages that in fact every single descendant of David that approached the house of the Sadducees were rejected because they had usurped the throne of David, and for that they were chastised, they were punished, in which all of their descendants were eliminated. They no longer exist among us. So to give you an idea how powerful was the actions of the Sadducees, that God himself took action to eliminate that whole ancestry of the Sadducees, who basically usurped the throne of David. It could have happened, but it didn't. Because why? Because of the leaders. Same issues we have today. Exile could finish in a moment if the Jewish leadership outside of exile so want to make it happen. But unfortunately, we see the politics take place even today, that this delay is happening. In a way, it's good. Some of you say, hey, it's a great thing, because if there's no temple, there can't be no Sanhedrin either. If there's no Sanhedrin, there can't be restoration of the Davidic dynasty, which is a monarchy. It is an anointed monarchy in which there's a lot of components that takes place. It would be a unique type of monarchy that we have not seen for ages. Nothing like the monarchy of England or of Spain. Obviously, it will be unique in that it is sanctioned and appointed by God himself. And this is what makes the issue of Mashiach so unique. And this is why I tell my Christian brethren and friends, I tell them very clearly, he could have been. But when you say, and in the gospel mentions this reference as Jesus Christ, the very moment you add that suffix Christ, it's not his last name, my friends. It is a title. He never was the Christ. And people can't understand this. My Christian friends can't understand. How do you say he was never the Christ? Wasn't he anointed? No. And John the Baptist and his disciples never, ever was able to recognize that Jesus was the one that was sent. As a matter of fact, Jesus sends out a message to his disciples in chapter 11 of Matthew that says, you tell the disciples that these are the signs that I'm doing. I'm opening up the blind, the deaf sees, the deaf are coming back the dead are coming back to life, and tell them that this is what's happening. And I ask and pose the questions, are these the signs and miracles that the Messiah is supposed to do according to Jewish law? Obviously, we are not reliant on signs and wonders from any particular person that he or she is the Messiah by doing these things. The Rambam speaks about that halakhically, based on Torah, based on the Nevi'im, that he's not required to do any of that. He is required to bring back all the children of Israel to regather, to bring the ingathering. And that Jesus did not do. He had the opportunity. As a matter of fact, he cried. He cried. He said, "Oh, how many times as a mother chick I tried to bring together the hen or the chicks back to the hen and was unable to." And then he cries out in chapter 11 of Matthew, saying, "Woe to those cities that I'd come and performed all these miracles. It would be worse for you than on the day of judgment on these other cities." So what I'm saying is Jesus recognized his failure to be able to bring about the reality of all of these people back to the land. So thus, as a Messiah figure in the first century, he failed miserably. He did not do it. As a matter of fact, because of his political rivalry of the Sadducees, he was nailed for it. He was turned over to Rome. So you can't say the Jews killed Jesus. It was the Roman power who had the authority over and above the power of the Jews in the Sanhedrin, in the courthouse. So definitely we see another instance of pure anti-Semitism or anti-Judaism that was perpetrated against Jesus. And obviously Jesus roused up a lot of envy and a lot of rivalry as him proclaiming to be a potential Messiah of his time. And of course he got nailed for it, and he was never able to overcome that. And even when we look at the story of the resurrection, it becomes a whole different issue altogether. And here we find the Kuzari talk about that, the great humiliation that was caused as a result of the destruction of the temple. And my friends, those of you that are watching and looking at this and say, you know what, you guys are wanting to bring back the temple, and that's a sign of the Antichrist. I hear that constantly, over and over and over again. And I said, you know what, my Christian friends, study a little bit further the book of Daniel. You'll realize that most of everything that was mentioned in the book of Daniel had already taken place back in the destruction of the second temple, when Titus came and ransacked the temple, burned it, and basically raised an idol and had everybody worship the idol, and he made himself a god king, as it were. And if you didn't worship, your heads would roll. So a lot of these prophecies that refer to the quote unquote Christian Antichrist took place already. Even the Christian Paul the apostle, he wrote in around the year 50, 55, before the temple was destroyed, and he speaks about the concept of the Antichrist, anti-Messiah in First and Second Thessalonians, in which it already took place, my friend. So if you're looking for an anti-Messiah now, you're way past over 2,000 years ago. It took place already. And there are many anti-Messiahs, and it was never a Jew. It was always the Roman power that usurped and took over. And this is what is the inheritance of the Christian church today. It was usurped by you might call it the Antichrist spirit or the anti-Christian spirit, and today it is called Christianity. Now, King Solomon, now you may be upset at me with that, but that's fine. I could show it to you and I can prove it to you within the scriptures itself, our scriptures, and I can make it pinpoint precisely in historical moments within your own Christian Bible. Now, that's something to think about. Now, we go back over here and we'll take a look here that they chose to remain in exile and to serve the kings of the nations so as not to leave their homes and affairs. Nothing has changed, my friends. We've been in exile now over 2,000 years ago, and the mindset is still the same. Why leave the nations of the world? King Solomon may have referred to this when he said in Shir HaShirim, I am asleep, but my heart is awake. He has compared Galut to a person who sleeps, his senses and faculties, but his heart still beats and is alert. He anxiously awaits the return of that moment of Tut, when God and his king will rule Israel and the whole entire world. The heart represents the continuation and persistence of prophecy that has hovered over the nation in the time of Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Hark, my beloved knocks. It states, is God's calling to the nations to return to the land of Israel that emerges And this is the heartfelt beat of every single Jew, even outside of Israel. My head is filled with dew, represents the divine presence that emerges from the shadow of the walls of the Beit HaMikdash and complains about the delay as a person who waits for another outdoors at the outbreak and is impatient because he becomes soaked with the dew. I have disrobed, verse 3, is a reply to the nation that is so slothful to return. As a person who's lazy to get up out of bed, I was talking about this morning. All you have to do is open up your eyes and realize that your parnasa is right there. Just get up, get out of your bed, and God provides. Same thing. Just get out of your bed. And my beloved has sent forth his hand from the entrance. Verse 4 applies to Ezra, Nehemiah, and the other prophets who beseeched the Israelites to return to the land, till finally some of them agreed to do so. And even they did not do so wholeheartedly. Keep in mind, by this time, many of the Israelites had intermarried pagan women. We're not talking about righteous, Noachide, God-fearing women. No, no, no. They married wicked pagan women. And this is where the edict of Ezra came forth and says, separate yourselves from these women and their children. He told them, return, but divorce them. Give them the maintenance. Divorce them. Why? Because I'll be honest with you, bad influence corrupts good behavior. And the reality is that these women were bringing down the character and the morals and the behaviors of the Israelites. They were being contaminated by their lifestyle. Same thing. When you see a righteous woman that basically raised the standards of Torah and God's value up, that is a good woman. Being the divine flow descends upon a person only to the extent that he prepares himself for it, be it a little or be it a lot. The divine flow did not descend upon these returnees in a perfect measure, and the Creator had repaid the nation for its wickedness. Indeed, if we had readied ourselves, if we had prepared ourselves wholeheartedly, enthusiastically to welcome the God of our forefathers, we would have merited the miracles and wonders of the kind that occurred to our forefathers in Egypt. As to our utterances concerning the exalted status of the land of Israel, when we quote quote verses such as bow at his holy mountain, or bow at his footstool, or he who restores his presence to Zion, as you have stated in your admonition, they resemble the twitter of the starling, because we devote no thought to the content of these passages. Now the Kuzari responds to the Chacham. Enough has been said on the subject. Now I would like to ask you to explain a number of other passages that I have read in the sections dealing with sacrificial offerings, which are difficult to grasp and to accept. For example, the passage saying, my sacrificial offering, my food for my fires, my fragrant aroma, which is based on Badamibar, Numbers chapter 28, verse 2, or other passages stating that God's sacrifices is his food and his aroma. Now, the Chacham begins to respond to these questions. Yehuda Halevi, an incredible Sephardi Jew that was a tall figure in the time of Spain, and till this day, it becomes incorporated as one of the greatest sages of Spanish Jewry. And this is the reason why there is a revival, my friends, of the Sephardic jewelry worldwide and where Spanish lands, and which had been humiliated as a result of the Inquisition for thousands of years. And yes, there are still descendants of those who basically had to undergo forced conversion. And we find that this is obviously being displaced and humiliated by rabbis who basically don't want to see the return of the Sephardic jewelry, because it means the return of that period of enlightenment that swept jewelry worldwide, because Sephardic jewelry was of such a plateau, of such high level, that it was the one that introduced a lot of the mystical elements that today the Ashkenazic world, in particular Hasidic world, enjoys and engulfs in. And yet they were also the ones that put in a lot of booby traps within those Kabbalistic texts to be able to make sure they would keep out the neophyte, the person that was a beginning learner. That is why today Kabbalah and Hasidut are all so contaminated with that ancient Gnosticism. Now that's why I sent out an alert and I said, look, if you learn these philosophies, you're going to deal with a lot of ideologies that was in the first century Christianity, which was called Ma'amim Notzrim, the teachings of the Nazarene, which was elements of mystical Gnosticism, which we now have it within Judaism in today's different factions. And this is why a true Sephardi, please listen closely, and I'm not against any other sect or denominations of Judaism, but I have to be honest with you. Learning and studying what Sephardic jewelry was all about, what was Sephardim all about, anyone involved as a Sephardi in what I would say Hasidut or Kabbalah, basically are involved in something that were not true elements of Sephardic jewelry. What? What are you saying? Yes, my friends, because many of the Sephardic jewelry that were Kabbalists, true Kabbalists, weren't involved in what today is Kabbalah. They weren't. As a matter of fact, they hid this teaching only to students that were worthy to learn it. Not like today that has been proliferated everywhere as a new religion, as a new philosophy. To such extent, you have the Kabbalah Center, which has nothing to do with Judaism. It has to do with esoteric mysticism, very similar to today's or to ancient time Gnosticism. Make the comparison. I have, for example, and I've studied at depth, Latanya, Hasidic book of Kabbalistic philosophy. And if you compare that with first century Gnostic teachings, you will see not much difference between one text and the other. Those who never study Gnosticism can't tell the difference between one and the other, but those who have can see the elements coming together in the sources where they are framed from. And by the way, I'm not the only one that says this. There are other rabbis who studied Kabbalah, studied Hasidut, who have said the same thing. So I'm not the only one. So if you're going to be launching attacks at me, well, worth it. Truth, let it be known. The sources are from Gnostic elements from the first century, not of recent. Okay, let's go further. The Chacham then responds to the Kuzari. What does he tell the Kuzari? For my fire has resolved all the difficulties. The meaning of the passage is that the fragrance, aroma, and the sacrificial offering is not ascribed to God, but to his fires, as it says. My sacrificial offerings, my food for my fire. God's fire are the fire that descends from the heavens onto the sacrifices according to God's will and burns them. After a part of the sacrificial animal is burned, the priest of the Beit HaMikdash eats the remaining part. So our intent in the arrangement of the offering, the sacrifice is that divine providence should guide us in a unique way so that we would not be abandoned to the whims of nature or happenstance. In order to understand how the divine presence devolves upon the nation in the merit of sacrificial offering, take as an example the human soul, says Yehuda Halevi, which dwells in an animal-like body with its natural predilections. When a person achieves a natural perfection, his spiritual faculties operate properly. His strength becomes such that it becomes qualified to receive something which is elevated above the corporeal and animal. It is proper that the intellect dwells in him like a king, and to teach him the ways of exploration and to rectify. Here's the key word: to rectify his action. His intellect, his will, stay with his personality as long as his body is complete and healthy. However, when a body becomes damaged and his natural function is impaired, the human reason also becomes impaired and leaves the person. This is something that also the Rambam talks about in his book regarding health. The fool who judges by appearance can come to the conclusion that the intellect is nourished by the natural food, such as eating, drinking, and aroma. This is because the fool observes that when a human body is nourished by food, then the intellect is also active, and when the supply of food is cut off, the intellect takes leave of the person, but the reasoning is faulty. By the way of comparison, we state that the same concerning divine influence. The Creator wishes to better all of his creatures, so when the body functions properly, it is ready to receive some aspect of divine influence and guidance. God will not withhold his light from that person and will dissolve wisdom or devolve wisdom and understanding upon him. And this is very important because the person will not receive that light and divine influence upon him will be impaired if he is sick. You should not think the change in the Beit HaMikdash service changes or is impaired or impairs God's glory, the Creator's glory. This being so, the divine influence as such is not affected by these actions. This is because he is far above and beyond any impairment or change. A change in the order of the Beit HaMikdash service will only prevent us from receiving the influence. The Torah refers in the order of sacrificial offerings with all of the acts involved in it. The incense, the singing of the Levites, the eating of the sacrificial meat by the priests according to all the commandments of the holy and pure Torah as divine services and God's food. The meaning of these expressions is that these activities are intended to please God with what? In the best manner that can be achieved by the Israelites together with the priests and God's servants. The expression that's used as acceptance of an offering when applied to God should be taken literally to mean that he enjoys the offering because he is holy, he is elevated and above any corporeal pleasure. It is the Israelites who are the actual beneficiaries of the offering. Likewise, the expression that God dwells among the Israelites refers to the honor that he bestows upon them. The offering of sacrifice is similar to the process of occurring in the human body. The body digests the food and produces the blood. The blood is processed in a number of stages, each of which purifies it purifies the other. This occurs first in the intestines, the liver, whence the purified blood flows to the heart, and from there to the seat of human intellect, which is the brain. This means that the food sustains life and ensures proper functioning of the human heart, soul, and brain. It is the food that stimulates the performance of the digestive system and the other limbs and organs by ways of veins, arteries, and nerves. To sum up, says Rabbi Yehuda Levi, food serves as a cause to the body to attain its natural perfection so it will be ready for the reign of the human soul, the soul which is an angel-like or angelic-like, that of the entity that separates and disassociated from human society, as it's stated in the book of Daniel, chapter 2, verse 11, who do not dwell with flesh. This soul, although it rules the person and guides him, still does not occupy a definable space because it is a spiritual entity within. Hence, it does not take pleasure in food because it is not corporeal being. This means that the soul benefits from food indirectly through the well-being of the body that also applies to the food of sacrifice. Sacrificial offerings perfects the natural health of the Israelite so that the divine flow can devolve upon them. I'm going to pause here and stop here for this morning, but it's interesting enough that the old saying, you are what you eat, becomes a reality, especially for the Jews. If you eat treif, your soul becomes treif. If you eat kosher, you are keeping your inner sides holy. Be holy, says the Lord. And this is a true reality that in everything we do, whether we are eating, whether we are in our physicality, the idea of doing things for the sake of Shamayim, for the sake of heaven, is important. How to do it where God says, all right, okay, is within our Torah and within what our sages has taught us. And this is why it's so important that we wake up in the morning like lions and tigers and wake up to learn Torah, to daven, and to connect with God and with the Jewish people. This is Rabbi Moshe Otero. Remember the ways of Israel. We're here to help and teach and learn and spread out the wellsprings of Torah, not necessarily minut, because we're not involved in that, but yes, Torah teaching, the teachings of the sages, and blessing Kalal Israel, and as a result, the rest of the world. Shalom B'racha. Have a wonderful week. This is Rabbi Moshe Otero with the Ways of Israel.